Good evening, everybody. It's John Windover here for yet another instalment of our Inspirability Talks at Airability. We are doing our very best to maintain people's levels of engagement with our wonderful charity, but of course, a great excuse to listen to some fascinating people and to some stories that us GA mortals are not going to be familiar with on our daily jaunts around the UK in our light aircraft. And today is no different. We've got a chap by the name of Andrew Neofytou, who's been spending a lot of time in the air, both in the airlines, but also formerly a military pilot flying the Sea Harrier. But just before we get into Andrew's story, remember you can download these talks via Spotify as a podcast and also off your iPhone. And so these are available to you to listen to at your leisure. And of course, we're doing this to raise money for Airability, as I've said. So do feel free to donate to our charity to keep us going. It's been a hard winter. We haven't flown, and every penny really does go to an amazing cause to put people in the air that otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. Okay, well, I mentioned that we have Andrew joining us this evening, and Andrew really is the epitome of a career plan that has stayed alive and, you know, maintained the dream. Andrew has dealt with many challenges throughout his early years, keeping his mind fully focused on his ultimate dream, and he did achieve that and became a military pilot. But as I say, not without its challenges. So we'll listen intently to Andrew's story, and I think we can all learn about tenacity, resilience, keeping the faith, and drawing on those around you, and also, of course, from within. So something that probably chimes with many people during these tough times. But Andrew, he, as I say, he kept his dream alive, and he joined the Air Training Corps. He is Top Gun generation, like myself, was inspired by the movie. If ever he needed any more inspiration to join the Royal Navy. But he joined the Air Cadets. He got an RAF flying scholarship and got a PPL at the age of 17. Which moved him into the University Air Squadron, where he studied aeronautical engineering. So he was able to fly the Bulldog during those early years of his life, before finally realizing his dream and being able to enter the services as a pilot. He was streamed to fly fast jets following his EFT training on the Firefly. And because he joined the Royal Navy, he wanted to, really only go towards one goal, which was the Sea Harrier. And to get there, he had to get through, the tough training on the Tucano at Linton-on-Ouse, followed by the Hawk at RAF Valley, and then finally to Yeovilton, where he began his fast jet training in earnest. But that was not without its challenges, and we're going to hear some really, dramatic events that occurred in Andrew's life during his conversion onto the Harrier before going on to the front line. He flew on the front line and then eventually transitioned into the airlines in 2006 and has flown everything. He's got a tremendous amount of experience, Boeing's and Airbus aircraft. We'll hear about that. But latterly, he's set up his own business called Deck Wingman, which is a consultancy company that supports people who want to transition from the military into the airlines, or those that want to join the airline world from scratch. And I urge you to have a look at the website. It's absolutely fantastic and answers all the questions you've had. And also he has a podcast as well, for what's it called, for Flying Out Loud. And there's some really good pods that Andrew's uploaded recently. So also have a look at that. Right, well, what an intro. Andrew, are you there?
I am here. Hello, John. Thank you very, very much for that introduction. Today, somebody told me, or I saw some sort of meme, I think they're called these days, to say that it was as long from the end of the Second World War when the Spitfire flew to when Top Gun came out, the F-14s, and the same period of time has now passed from F-14s and Top Gun to now. So.
It's scary, isn't it? It really is. It ages all of us, doesn't it? But do you know, on that movie, I think it was a question that was actually, went into sort of day-to-day media, and the first opening sequence of the Top Gun movie is one of those elements of any movie that's timeless, isn't it? And I know we're biased, but There must be thousands of pilots around the world that were inspired by that movie. But talking of inspiration, Andrew, thanks for joining us. And we've been talking backstage about the ups and downs of your career. And I know there's a lot of people that are really keen to listen to those stories firsthand and to draw, for themselves some inspiration from how you've dealt with that in the past. But we need to go back to the beginning. There's always a start to the story. And you did say that it was a dream. Can you remember when it began?
I'm not sure I can remember exactly, because I think I was probably about 2 or 3 years old. My mum says, in the pushchair, I'd point up at the sky and say "sky" whenever an aeroplane flew over. So I think it probably was that early. But my dad had a PPL, and I used to go and do a bit of flying with my dad. And of course, the wonderful organisation, it's the Air Cadets. Got to do a bit of flying in a chipmunk, walking one of those parachutes under your bum, and all the normal stuff that young kids do when they're keen on aeroplanes, model aeroplane flying, all that sort of stuff. So really, since I can remember, John.
Yeah, quite. And you're talking of their training corps. I mean, that's just a wonderful platform, isn't it, for people to enter the armed services and to, I think, learn a lot about themselves and the world around them. And I've always said it fills in the gaps that school doesn't, and that was your route to essentially getting into the cockpit, was it not?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And, that's where I became aware of all the amazing opportunities that there were. And I still think flying scholarships do exist with the military, perhaps being scaled back a bit. But that's when I got the opportunity to realise my dream of, learning how to fly my own, flying solo through an Air Force flying scholarship, which I attended Biggin Hill. I think it's back in 1991. That makes me feel very old. But that's when it first sort of kicked off, in earnest.
And what was it like learning to fly at that age? Because, I mean, as a teenager, you can't even drive a car at this point. You're at school. I mean, how did it feel? What did your mates think?
Well, I didn't know, to be honest with you, I didn't have the easiest time going through school, to be honest with you, John. I was one of those kids that was a victim of being bullied, and I'm always listen out now and look out for kids that may have been having a bit of a tough time, because it was a bit of a tough time going through school. And it turns out being good at school, good at athletics, and then going in and achieving this flying scholarship and learning how to fly an aeroplane wasn't a particularly popular thing to do. But to be honest with you, going and learning how to fly, I don't think I realised how sort of unusual it was at that age to be doing it. It just felt natural to be doing it, I guess. And I mean, looking back on it now, it wasn't very natural, particularly when you think, my mum and dad came along, and particularly my mum watching me go off flying in a Tomahawk out of Nottingham Tollerton Airport. It must have been heart in mouth territory for her. But I didn't think it was anything unusual, to be honest with you.
The good old Tomahawk. I had the pleasure of owning one of those as well, and it was the type of airplane that if you let go to look at your map, you'd end up like this, wouldn't you? About 5 seconds later. All of those, all of those folks that learned on the 152s had it easy.
Yeah, that's it. Well, you hear all sorts of horror stories. That's something I've realised throughout an aviation career. Some aeroplanes have sort of terrible reputations for, spinning or some other type of unusual behaviour. And people used to say, "Oh, the Tomahawk, T-tail is going to be dangerous." Most of it is myth, to be honest with you, most of these aeroplanes. But I loved it. Going flying and, as I say, not being able to drive a car. I remember my sort of first forays into trying to ask girls out on dates, and I took this. She was the sister of one of the other guys that was on the course with me, and I asked if she wanted to go flying, and she said yes. "What time are you picking me up?" And of course, I said, "I can't pick you up. I'm getting a train to Nottingham, and I'll grab a taxi." But we went flying, and we got back safely. So hey, it worked out. So, yeah. Awesome.
We talk about the challenges of early, of everybody's life at school. I mean, school is one of those places, isn't it, that parents, I've got children, we send them off to this sanctuary. We think they're doing very well in these secure walls of education, and of course, education is just one element. The other element is their peer group and those around them. And I think we've all had a taste of bullying. We've all had a taste of the challenges of our teen years, and you can't draw on the wisdom and life experience perhaps as you would do at our age. So I mean, if you just wind the clock back, how did you maintain your focus, Andrew? Because you had this dream, and of course by the age of your teen years, you know that you have to achieve at school to fulfill that dream. But those distractions, I mean, how did you deal with it?
I mean, I was really lucky to have a loving family. That plays a huge role in it. There's so many kids out there that don't have a wonderful family to look after them. So that was a big part of it for me. I think I did have some friends. Obviously, I wasn't without friends, but it was just a dogged determination, John. I really genuinely had a belief that I was going to go and fly fast jets one day, and I just wanted to work through it. And there were some fantastic teachers, just to say, at the school as well. Probably had one eye on me, although one or two said, not everybody achieves their dream. So again, I think as adults as well, we really do play a huge role in supporting and encouraging young people to pursue their dreams and to work as hard as they can to achieve them. If they don't, or their life takes a different path, then so be it. But certainly something I know now is really to support young people in achieving whatever they want to achieve. If it takes different paths, so be it.
Yeah, and it's so valuable, isn't it, to know that the words that come out of your mouth are spoken with real life experience. And I think that's the great thing about putting something back into aviation. Well, you got your flying scholarship, so it was off to the military you went. So what's the story?
Well, yeah, it wasn't a particularly smooth path. So I thought, hey, I'm sorted here. I've got an Air Force flying scholarship, so that's me on my way to. This was in a day when you used to find a lot more fast jets flying around. I'm going to go on my way and apply to the Royal Air Force, become a fast jet pilot. So I initially applied for a scholarship, a bursary through university, which I wasn't successful. But I thought, well, hey, they don't give many of those out. It'll be fine. And went off to university to study aeronautical engineering, and got stuck into University Air Squadron life. Although, again, first year, because my A-levels weren't very good. And I'm often asked by people, have you got to have great A-levels? And the answer is no. I mean, obviously work hard at school, but they said, we're a bit concerned, so come back next year. So I did, and I got in the next year. Had a great time on the University Air Squadron in general terms, and spent a couple of years flying there. But sort of first exposure to sort of cliques, I guess, and there was a bit of a clique, and I've never really liked them, to be honest with you. And I could see why people do like them, but for me, I didn't really enjoy that sort of cliquey atmosphere. But I got some really good friends that were on the University Air Squadron, and that ended up flying on a Harrier with me, actually. Wow. But towards the end of my time, I was off doing my final navigation test in this Bulldog at low level, somewhere in the Lake District, I think. And I say I think because I didn't really know where I was, to be honest with you, John. All I could see were big hills everywhere, and I got hopelessly lost. And the instructor I had said it was time to give up the dream. I wasn't good enough. So that was a bit of a challenging time. And so off we headed back to RAF Wood Vale, and sort of a little bit of a heavy heart, if I'm honest with you, because I thought, well, maybe I'm not good enough, and applied to the Air Force as soon as I finished university, and I didn't get into the Air Force. So yeah. That was sort of, I guess, really, that was the point where you could start questioning your ability. Well,
back to the point you made about role models and people in a position of responsibility, watching what comes out of their mouth. I mean, whilst you would have been in your 20s, I guess at that point.
I was 20 years old. Yeah.
I mean, it's as someone who's married to a school teacher and who volunteers at the Air Cadets up the road at Biggin Hill, about 30 yards from where you went for your aptitude testing for the flying scholarship, it is so important, isn't it, to instill confidence and belief in those that essentially are in your care.
Massively so. I mean, perhaps they thought they were trying to be supportive of those statements, but for me, it didn't work. And and I hadn't performed. I'm not going to find excuses for getting lost on that navigation exercise, and we can always muse over why that might have happened. But it was a pretty upsetting time. But I thought, hey, it's not going to deter me. But I headed off back to my parents and went and did some part-time work wiring up boilers for Worcester Bosch, and it was an interesting time again. But I have to say, all these sort of ups and downs and the people you meet along the way in these journeys. So whether it was a bit of a tough time at school, or then going and wiring up boilers in a factory, one of the things it did for me was it exposed me to people from every area of life. And I always think it's a real I feel very, very lucky, essentially, to have been brought up and had experiences and working with everyone. I've been fortunate enough to sit down with royalty at meals in the military, and then take myself back to wiring up boilers in Claycross. And it was, but I love all people, and having that experience to be able to engage. There's so many people I don't think are very capable of engaging with people from all walks of life, but it's something that I really, really love. People are the best thing about this world.
Yeah, for sure. The rich tapestry of society, it's amazing, isn't it? And just
Absolutely.
knowing, I think it's something that is innate. I do believe that your ability to just turn and put yourself on a level, and they call, I think a personality of your type is a reflector, they call it, isn't it? You can put yourself into their shoes, and you can actually open them up and communicate. And
yeah, absolutely. And just, and I've always thought with everybody, treat everybody as you'd expect to be treated, with respect, with kindness, with care, and generally you get the best out of people that way. Yeah.
Well, so that moves us perfectly into what got the best out of you in terms of your entry into the Royal Navy. So obviously you were too good for the Royal Air Force, and the Navy, snapped you up. So how did that happen? What's the process of entering the Royal Navy, and where do you go for your officer training?
So the process for joining the Royal Navy starts at the Admiralty Interview Board after your Armed Forces Careers Office interview. And the Admiralty Interview Board is very, very similar to the Officer and Aircrew Selection Centre. All the same types of assessment process, interviews and group exercises and leadership tasks and all of that sort of stuff. Interestingly for me, I felt like I was at home in the Royal Navy, and I guess each service has got its own sort of character. And for me, all of those experiences just lent themselves to the Royal Navy, and that's how I felt when I went through the Admiralty Interview Board. I genuinely thought this is where I was meant to be. I really, really like this environment. I really like these people. It wasn't I didn't like the Royal Air Force. I just felt like I fitted in. So I went through the Admiralty Interview Board, and then off you head to Dartmouth in Devon, the Britannia Royal Naval College, and that's where I went through officer training. And I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. You head off down to Dartmouth, and you go through the big gates on this bus. I've been picked up at the train station, and there you are for 6 weeks, and I literally had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Probably just as well.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Because it's a hard graft, I'm sure, and but not without its lifelong relationships established there.
100%. My best friends in the Navy started at Dartmouth, and they're still my best friends now. Some 20 odd years later, 25 years later. Yeah. So, and the military is an exceptional place for making lifelong friendships. And I'm extremely lucky to, and I owe a great debt to the military for allowing those friendships to be formed.
Yeah, and so you graduate, and you're edging ever closer to the dream. So, what was the pathway to getting yourself down to Yeovilton onto the Sea Harrier?
So I'm sure you've had loads of guests on around this area of fast jet training, but it started at elementary flying training, as you said in your introduction, on the Firefly as it was then. And that's where you get what they call streamed. So you're either sent to fly helicopters in the Navy or fast jets. So I was lucky enough to be selected to go and fly fast jets. There we go, a bit fast forwarding. And then from there, went off to basic fast jet training on the Tucano at Lincoln-on-Ouse as it was then, and then to RAF Valley, which is where this photograph was taken. So some of my very, very good mates, well, they're all good mates on the photo there. And that was taken at the first stage of fast jet training at RAF Valley on 208 Squadron, as it was then. And that was our wings day. So that's when we got our wings, and that was back in around 2000.
Fantastic. A memory that's etched in your brain, I'm sure.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
obviously the Royal Navy do things in tandem with the Royal Air Force because of shared assets and locations as well. Did the lead into the Sea Harrier differ in any way, or was it purely preparing you for a fast jet cockpit before things then diverged?
The training was essentially, with some minor differences, the same as the Royal Air Force. So again, some of my very good mates are Royal Air Force pilots, and essentially mirrored it all the way through. There was one extra sortie on the tactical weapons unit at RAF Valley, where you get to learn to fight the aeroplane, and that was just set aside for Royal Navy pilots to pretty much go up and do an hour of consolidation, and it was probably one of my less finer moments. I elected to go off, and I thought I was going to have a bit of fun, so I'm going to see how high this thing goes if I pull it into the vertical. So that's what I did. I went as long as fast as I could, and then pulled into the vertical, shot up through a layer of cloud, straight between two other Hawks in battle formation, which was, I could probably admit to now, I wouldn't want to do at the time.
Did they see you though?
I don't think so, but it was a pretty silly thing to do, and lessons you learn along the way. But yeah, that was one extra flight we got, but essentially the rest of it mirrored. But of course, the only option, as we knew it, although it did subtly change, was to fly the Sea Harrier. And if you weren't cutting the grade to go the single seat route, then the chances were you'd be chopped and head off to fly helicopters. Although around that time, some of my colleagues were given the opportunity to go and fly Tornado, F3 and GR4 with the Royal Air Force, if they didn't quite get a single seat recommendation. And that happened at what they call the roll disposal. So at the end of RAF Valley in the tactical weapons unit. And, you know, I mean, Tornado pilots are exceptional pilots, but it just, there was this extra little bit, and, you know, I wasn't an instructor, so I'm not able to say what it was they were looking for, but that extra little bit that pushed you over the line to get to the Sea Harrier. And I was lucky enough to be selected to go and fly the Sea Harrier.
Yeah. And can you remember the day? I mean, how did it happen? How did you get told?
I've got vague memories, John, of drinking a terrible drink called Jeremiah Weed, which is our US exchange instructor that flew the A-10 brought over, and eating, I think they're called roll mops, some awful pickled fish from Northern Europe. That's the memory I have of being told I was going to go and fly the Sea Harrier. But yeah, really, it's when that letter comes through to tell you that you've been appointed to Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton to go and fly the Sea Harrier. That was an amazing day, because that genuinely is what it was all about for me.
And so obviously you have the chance to catch your breath. You know, it's finally going to happen. So how does the Royal Navy, or how did the Royal Navy prepare its pilots for the Sea Harrier?
It was genuine baptism of fire stuff. I have to be honest with you. The Hawk T1 that I flew wasn't really geared to stepping into the cockpit of a Sea Harrier. There was no head-up display, you know, pretty underpowered engine compared to the Harrier. So I wasn't really expecting it to be quite as steep a learning curve as it was, but it really, really was. The training to go solo, there was a bit of training in the sim, 2 flights in a 2-seat T8 Harrier, and then off you go solo in a Sea Harrier. And I genuinely, I felt like I was right on the limit of being ready to go and do that. Obviously got away with it, but the guys said, you know, it's going to accelerate a bit more quickly than the 2-seater, which was incredible acceleration anyway. But then to go and get in a single seat jet, the Sea Harrier went from 0 to 100 knots in about 4 seconds, and it would keep going like that. It was a brutal acceleration. But I have to say that one of the best, this footage here it was one a bit later. This is landing on a short strip, Delta 29 North, it was known as, at RAF Wittering, where we went and practiced all the V-style stuff. Right. But yeah, amazing aeroplane, and that first solo is one of the standout moments of my career so far. And just looking in the mirror in front of the top of the cockpit there, and looking back and seeing the wings sort of disappear into vapor as I entered this block of airspace. But really, I mean, I got back to the circuit, and it was a challenging aeroplane. And then you go into one more 2-seat T8 Harrier flight to do what they called press-ups, so vertical takeoff and landings. That was good timing there from video production. And and you do 3 vertical takeoff and landings. Then your second ever solo in a Harrier was a vertical takeoff to hover at Yeovilton, and it was a general NAVEX, I would say, around the dispersal of Yeovilton. And from there, you moved towards this V-Star stuff, which is what we're seeing on this video now. And in fact, this bit of video is leading into circuit to land in Vigo Pad in Vigo Woods. And that's all the leaves you can see being blown around there. And landing on this wooded clearing. And it's all designed to sort of build your confidence in the V-Star regime, which is a challenging regime to operate the Harrier in, particularly the Sea Harrier, which was, first generation Harrier. So it really was all stick and rudder, nozzle stuff.
Yeah. Now I'm sure you're going to have your opinions about the F-35 boys, how easy it is for them. One of the things that has been on my mind, Andrew, with the Harrier, particularly the generation of Harrier you flew, is because of the nozzles, and because you can adjust so many different regimes of flight, how on earth do you keep ahead of what you can and you can't do, depending on your payload, depending on your fuel load, depending on the length of the runway? Is it wet? Is it dry? Has it got an incline? Hasn't it? Is it non-tarmac, or is it rough field? There's so many combinations that you probably had to consider operationally. How did you stay on top of that? I mean, was it just a case of looking through the knee board, and it's all written down there based on the weights you left with and you plan to come back? I mean, give us some perspective on just how the complexity of the operation of the airplane was before you start fighting with it.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say, I mean, the instruction is exceptional, and there are many, many more Harrier pilots, far more experienced and far more capable than I ever was in a Harrier. I should say that, and they were the pilots that were instructing me, and so firstly, exceptional training, and secondly, lots of rules of thumb, but particularly for calculations like going off the ski jump or hovering at higher payloads, like you say, then there were charts and tables we go into to work out our performance. The Harrier had, for those that don't know much about it, water injection. So we had various operating regimes, engine performance regimes, and things like short lift wet, short lift dry, lots of different terms depending on what you were doing with the water injection. So yeah, lots of calculations. It was a challenging airplane to fly. I think that was one of my less salubrious vertical landings. But I mean, it was a particularly challenging piece of kit to fly, John, I think is the honest truth, particularly in a transition to and from hovering flight, where it was very easy to get out of shape and put yourself in real trouble very quickly.
Yeah, sure. Now, you obviously had a journey to the front line from the day that you walked up to your first Sea Harrier, and a journey that I indicated on the introduction was not without its dramas. So just to remind everybody, again, there was a couple of incidents that happened to you personally, Andrew, but also one that you witnessed. Now, I know Chad's got some footage that he can queue up, but perhaps if I may, just sort of ask you just to sort of share that dreadful day at Wittering that you shared with me on our call last week. It must have been very eye-opening for you.
Yeah, around the time that footage was taken there, I was on my course with one of my very, very good friends, Nath Gray, who has gone on to do exceptional things, F-35 test pilot, and the first to land on board HMS Queen Elizabeth. Our instructor, I won't mention name-wise, but one of the most highly, if not most highly respected Harrier pilots in the Sea Harrier force, incredibly experienced, an out-and-out lovely person, an exceptional pilot, and a brilliant instructor. And on this particular day, it wasn't to be the best day for these guys. I'd outbriefed the two pilots to go and fly in a T8 Harrier, and unfortunately, after takeoff on one of the sort of shorter runways, more narrow runways, that they had an engine failure, and the outcome of that engine failure was that the aircraft only at about 50 to 80 feet rolled and required them both to use the ejection seat. unfortunately, the instructor had an unsuccessful ejection, and my friend had a successful ejection. But together with my other course colleague and the amazing engineering team, we headed over to where the accident had happened, and it was clear that unfortunately the instructor had lost his life, and my friend had ejected over the perimeter fence, and was crouched down and clearly in shock. I was the first to scale the perimeter fence to get to Nath, whilst I shouted at the fire crew to cut the fence down. And it was just 5 minutes earlier I'd said goodbye to these guys at the outbrief, and then 5 minutes later, and you'd seen an airplane in a state that you wouldn't normally see an airplane, and seeing lots of familiar items but in unfamiliar circumstances. It's still pretty challenging to talk about now, John, if I'm honest with you. It's, try to hold myself together on the video now, but it was an incredibly challenging and upsetting day for everybody involved.
No doubt, and a traumatic experience, and I we all thank you for sharing that, because I think there's always something to be learned, isn't there? A problem aired is a problem shared, and I think that there's plenty of folks listening to this, Andrew, that will draw something from that. How people deal with trauma in their lives, whether it's personal loss or whether it's something that's in your professional career. I think it prepares you for that next event. If you think you've got through that one and you've kept it together, you can tackle the next. And I think that's unfortunately a habit of life, isn't it? It always reminds us and brings us back down to earth with a thump when we think life's going well, and then all of a sudden we get hit in the face. And I'm sure it's happened to all of us in some measure. And those folks that come through the door at Airability, of course, will have had perhaps their unfair share of challenges in life. And one thing I should say is we're sort of halfway through a really fantastic talk, Andrew, and I should remind everybody, do please like, comment and share. Please go on to the comment section on YouTube, or you can send some questions in. We're going to be asking Andrew some questions a little bit later on about his career, and most interestingly for me is what Andrew's been doing since his military career. Of course, that's only half the story, less than half the story, in fact. Okay, well, moving on forwards with your training. Again, another challenge, another two challenges that presented themselves. Now, Chad is in the background and has some videos. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you had an issue with an engine failure, and I think we have some footage that's being queued up by Chad. I'm just making sure that he's able to show that. So Chad, that's your cue. If you can put it up on the screen, that'll be great. And what we'll do is we'll let people listen to that, and then afterwards you can let us know what it was that we were seeing. What we were
450 now.
That's to go. There we go.
Now, Chad has messaged me and said that unfortunately there's a few Wi-Fi issues he's having, so it may not be the case that we can play this back. And he's just said he's good. All right, cue the video, Chad. Off we go.
What type of approach to require? Riders would like to recover for individual PARs once we clear the swing. Mayday, 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 winders, surge.
Winder, mayday, copy, squawk emergency.
Stand by. JPT's reducing, clinking 450 now. That's copied, just come up on the back box. Maintain your height. Maintain your height, you've got one below you.
Under request your intentions.
Stand by. Maintain your height, you've got a civilian below you. I'm trying to maintain 250. 3 liners surge, I think, mate. Copy. Confirm you shut it down. Got HQ off now. It's rattling like a bastard. It's squawk emergency. Squawk emergency. Okay, just advance the advance the throttle. And then we need to descend with, in fact, let's start a turn. We want a direct track back to Wittering, please. Help me clinky, please, mate. Okay. London, Winder 1 has an engine surge, request a right turn direct track to Wittering, stalking emergency.
Winder right turn, navigation Wittering approved.
I'm in MFS, I'm trying to get speed up to 250. Copy, keep your right turn coming in direction of Wittering first. Roger.
And 1 contact Sonic Mill 270.0.
70.0, reach 391. Car quick, you give me some words, mate. Come right 010 and tell me what your JPT is. JPT is 280, decreasing, engines rumbling, RPM's 15%, 260 knots. Okay, put the MFS on. MFS is on. Air brake in. Air brake's in. Okay, hold the relight button in and balance the throttle. It's rumbling like a good one, mate.
Line Pacific track north of you, descending to 150, present track, take it clear.
Copy. RPM's coming back up. Okay, just advance the throttle and see if you can make 75 to 80%. Roger.
Well, I'm on the edge of my seat there. It was a happy ending. Andrew, tell us what we were seeing there.
Yeah, so the tape ran out before the landing. That was the third flight of the day. So that was only about 3 months after the tragic accident, and I was making my way back with the staff pilot wingman from RAF Wittering to Royal Navy Air Station Yeovilton, crossing an airway called the Westcott radar corridor, and there was a bit of a rumbling noise from behind my head, and then all of a sudden a huge explosion, and the whole aeroplane started violently shaking. Of course, I knew it was something to do with the engine. Looked down at what they call the jet pipe temperature, the JPT, you could see there, and it was just going through 1,000 degrees, which means it's on fire and it's going to melt if I don't do something. In fact, parts of it did melt, it transpired. So I shut the engine down. And essentially the rest of that journey of 15,000 feet, from 24,000 feet down to 15,000 feet, was my first experience of gliding. And it took about 2 minutes. And I mean, great support from my wingman there. But, you know, ultimately you're on your own in the cockpit trying to resolve this issue. And what had happened was, and I've got a blade here from the actual engine. One of these blades had sheared off at the hub, the first stage of an 8-stage compressor, and gone through the rest of the engine. And in fact, the 7th and 8th stage of the compressor were entirely missing in the photograph from Rolls-Royce that I saw. So it had a pretty catastrophic engine failure and multiple relight attempts. I forget how many, because I kept trying. Every time I tried to restart it, it relit in surge again, so essentially catching fire again. But unfortunately, it did restart, and I managed to get some power out of it, although the 75 to 80% that my wingman was talking about there wasn't possible. Anytime I tried to get above about 65%, it started making even worse noises than it was already making. So I elected to leave it where it was. And my next issue then was landing the aeroplane at RAF Wittering at a very high approach speed, 180 knots, which happened to be the outrigger, the small wheels on the wing, tyre limiting speed. So I wasn't sure if on touchdown the tyres were going to burst. But anyway, they didn't. And I was lucky enough to survive it.
Goodness me. And obviously the engine gave you something to get back home, which was phenomenal, given what you found on the ground. Enough
power, but it wasn't enough power to do a normal approach. So again, I was flying an approach which no one had ever flown an approach to that sort of power before, because I didn't have enough power to fly a typical approach in a Harrier, which led to this very high approach speed. Pretty challenging approach. So it wasn't just handling the engine failure, it was then flying that approach, which I'd never flown before.
Yeah, right. Well, if one emergency wasn't enough, whilst you're a trainee pilot going ready to get onto the front line, then you had a second. So I think Chad has got something queued up for this as well. So I'll let him get that onto the screen. And this is the second occasion, Andrew, if wasn't enough in your life.
Yeah, 4 months later or something. The first one I had about 50 hours on the Harrier, and I'd only flown about 5 in the last 6 months following the other accident. So I was pretty inexperienced. And then this happened a few months later, just before finishing the OCU. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, let's take a look.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. I've got shattered canopy. Mayday, mayday. I'm with you at 6 o'clock. Come right. Roger visual, a descend and I'll stay with you. So descending, I'd like to stay with you. You're 6 o'clock. I've got an engine. Roger, Freddie, mayday, Fist 2, shattered canopy, you'd like to descend an RTV.
Roger, clear descend, squawk 7700.
I'll squawk for you, Scrabble, you fly. Roger, take me to the nearest, please. And reduce speed. Scrabble left 060. Where's it up? Fuck me. Raise to say nothing now, please.
18 miles, 053.
Let's get the height coming down, please. And Freddie, if I do have to go, I've no 16, I've got a bad canopy, but I'd like a safe vector to open water.
Roger, safe vector is north,
What's the latest start base, Freddie?
Freddie shot fly back to overcast at 1500 this time. Snapping is now 0224 miles.
Fist 2 to island, 1 to overshoot, you're well above glide path, you have 2.5 miles. Visual converting. Roger, Fist 1 and 2 visual. Right, crews ready, please.
And Fist approaching cable down, 1 cable up, the barrier's down.
Hold on, Scrabble, see you on the ground. Roger. Thanks, mate.
Well, I'm sure you can look back at that with, in the comfort of your home, just, reliving that moment. And I'm sure you've played that many a time. But, I mean, completely out the blue, explosive decompression. I mean, goodness. I mean, what did you think happened at the time?
I didn't know, to be honest with you, John. I must apologise for the language. I don't think I intended to transmit emergency, but I didn't actually know what had happened. I just finished a 2v2 intercept, so 2 Harriers against 2 other Harriers just for practice, and I was doing what they call bustering up, so full power trying to catch up to my wingman, and there was just a huge explosion again. But this time I couldn't breathe initially, but you just I likened it to someone sort of kicking you in the chest with both the feet. And couldn't see temporarily. My visor blew back. I actually ended up with windburn on my eyelids, and then I realised what happened, and pretty quickly. The engine did momentarily surge as well. Part of the engine ate the canopy. So that was a particularly that's a picture of the canopy as it was once I landed at RAF St Athan.
Goodness.
So I didn't really know, but then it became pretty obvious, and then it just. It ended up in an ultimately a safe approach, but it was a pretty exciting day out, and of course all of these 3 events had happened in the space of about 12 months. Yeah. So not the best introduction to flying a Sea Harrier. I'm surprised anyone goes flying with me, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, goodness me, if that was any preparation for you to go onto the front line, the person who's got the thickest skin was probably you on your first squadron, perhaps. But thank you for sharing those stories, Andrew. I know that probably doesn't go without its hardship over the years since that's occurred, because these things leave their mark. So and we'll come on to that point a bit later on, actually, about some of the folks we meet at Airability. So then you obviously went on to the front line with the Sea Harrier, and one of the things that just puts the EBGBs up me is operating an airplane at night off an aircraft carrier. There's not many options, is there? I mean, how does that? Clearly, the training prepares you, and we could spend a whole evening talking about the employment of the aircraft as an operational platform. But just from a piloting perspective, Andrew, you talk about compartmentalization. In the cockpit, you have to, and I'm sure that you fell back on your training with those emergencies. But with the Sea Harrier, you're off to fly a mission, and then you've got the challenge of getting back on the ship. I mean, just talk us through that, and that challenge that was would often present itself to you.
Yeah, so operating off the ship, again, people far more experienced than me, far more carrier landings than I've got, and in fact, there was a prerequisite amount of carrier landings before you get night qual, and I didn't achieve my night qualification for various reasons, which we'll touch on after this. But yeah, so but I did operate off the aircraft carrier, and it was a really challenging environment to operate from. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, really, John. It's compartmentalization. Again, the training is excellent, but it's having a cassette, I call it, for each phase of the flight. So a cassette for getting the aircraft ready to go off the boat, a cassette for launching, another one for joining a radar join, perhaps on your wingman, another one for the air to ground work or the air to air work you're going to do, another one for air to air refueling, and you just take these cassettes out and put them back in again. I think that's the way it did, but it was a challenging environment, particularly recovering to the aircraft carrier, particularly if you couldn't see it at maybe a mile or so away, and in poor weather, and then landing typically with not a great deal of fuel, a few minutes of fuel left, due to the performance issues you were touching on earlier. And landing on the aircraft carrier, not my aircraft.
I can tell you what this is. Now, you may have seen the Armchair Air Show that Airability put together.
I have indeed.
So this is an RAF exchange officer who ended up, or was it a Navy exchange officer? I can't remember. You might know him, Andrew. But he ended up flying Hornets and was talking us through a cat and trap experience, which sounds horrendous but exciting.
I interviewed someone on the podcast, a friend of mine who went on exchange from the Royal Navy to the US Navy flying F-18s. The episode's called Top Gun for obvious reasons. And I mean, I would have loved to have gone and had a go at flying the F-18. Yeah,
that's for sure. Right, so we're going to have to move on. There's still plenty to talk about. Again, dealing with challenges and curveballs, and Andrew has become a sort of a bit of a habit in the career that you've trodden thus far. And you had a long time on the front line and enjoyed it very much. But of course, something occurred from a medical perspective that unfortunately limited your days. So tell us about that and your transition into the airlines.
Yeah, so along the way, I'd had some problems with my lower back. So I had 2 spinal operations, one at going through basic fast jet training, and then another one when I joined the front line. And for very sad reasons, that meant the end of my time flying fast jets. So that's why I never got night qual. That time for me ended prematurely with the Royal Navy, which was a pretty distressing time, having worked so hard to get there. But it was clear to me that with these problems with my back, I just couldn't continue doing that flying. In fact, it wasn't safe for me to continue doing that flying. So that was the end of my time flying fast jets. But life goes on, John. As you say, and aviation is it's an amazing pastime and profession. So I was lucky enough to make the move to the airlines somewhat prematurely, but in 2006.
Yeah. Now, I have seen your bio, and it is impressive. 757, 767, A320, 787. Brilliant. I mean, what a way to end your days in the cockpit, being served a nice hot drink and a meal rather than a squash sandwich from your flying suit. But the question that's on my lips is, obviously you've come from a military background. You've been tuned to the military way of doing things in the cockpit. How did you draw on that experience as you stepped into the civilian world and into a multi-crew environment?
It's just a completely different environment. And I, again, sort of looking back at all those other experiences I'd had, and meeting people from all walks of life and just really enjoying working with different people. I mean, the airline world is just full of so many diverse people. Not that the military isn't, but people in the airline world genuinely do come from all walks of life, and I love it. I absolutely love the people I work with, and for me, it was a real eye opener. And I moved from Yeovil to Manchester and was flying with Thomas Cook Airlines, who is tragically no more. But I just had a fantastic time at Thomas Cook Airlines and met some wonderful people to fly with in the cockpit and cabin crew team. I really enjoyed it, but it's a challenge. It's a completely different way of operating. Flying the aircraft I found fairly natural, although it was a big jet, a different way of doing it. but a different cassette.
Yeah.
But you know, from an operational point of view, it's a completely different operation. And to be quite honest with you, I guess I pitched up thinking, well, I could be a captain, you know, a couple of years, but couldn't be further from the truth. There's so much to learn. And I remember thinking sort of 2 or 3 years in, God, thank goodness I'm not a captain yet, because there's so much I don't know yet.
Yeah.
And
I think aviation is a great leveler, isn't it? You know, it always pushes you back on the ground firmly when you sort of move into another facet. And one of the things the military does prepare you for well is leadership and teamwork. And did you find that you sort of maybe had an edge because of that background on some of the your other compatriots, or didn't it really did they just find their own way of leading? And
I don't know really. I mean, leadership's a really odd one. It's such a huge topic, isn't it? I always just say to people, you know, even if you are in a leadership role, I guess a captain is a leadership role, and as a first officer, I'm a sort of second in command. But I always think with leadership, it's one of those things I just say to people, you know, a leader is essentially just fulfilling a role within a team. They're no better than anybody else in that team. Their role just happens to be to try and steer the team to a successful outcome. And no, I don't think it gave me any particular edge, but I think I was pretty well rounded by this stage, I guess. And I just really enjoyed getting to meet new people from different backgrounds that I'd never met before. Some hilarious, you know, days out flying and trips away on long haul. I really enjoyed it.
I'm sure. Yes. No, absolutely. Just having a nice time down route, and of course 787 long haul. So you know, you can't just turn up, change the charts, and go back again. You have to stay over and enjoy the cuisine and the scenery. So no, that's great. And so what can we see here? This must be a 787, surely.
Yeah, I think this was a flight. I think it was over towards Los Angeles, heading. This is just coasting in over far northern Canada on a very northerly route, and just looking down. I mean, you almost feel like you can touch these icebergs and glaciers, but it's just incredible the views that we get. And I genuinely have done things that I'd never thought I'd ever get to do on people's bucket list just once in their life. But you know, from hot air ballooning in Mexico City to flying in on a hang glider in Rio de Janeiro with this cool guy that goes by the name of Coconut, and jumping off this platform and then landing on the beach. It's a hot air ballooning flight there. There's a sun rays over the sort of pyramids there in Mexico City. That was an incredible day. And my first time in a balloon, had a female balloon pilot. I mean, females are a massive minority still, sadly, in aviation, but I don't know what the percentage is in balloon pilot terms. But if it's anything like airline pilot terms, it's not high enough, but she was exceptional. And in fact, the way she took off and used the air currents at different altitudes to take off and land back at the same spot, it just blew my mind, to be honest with you, as well as the views you can see there.
Yeah, and you know, I couldn't agree more, Andrew. You know, it's, the ladies amongst us are the underrepresented minority in aviation, and we had a really good chat with Mandy Hickson actually on our last Inspirability talk, and we tried to come up with a solution. You know, and actually, it's all about grassroots. I think STEM has really taken off now to move girls and boys into science and technology, but STEM moves very neatly, doesn't it, at that grassroots schooling level into the girls and inspiring them. And I think girls will inspire girls, and if we haven't got enough girls to inspire them who are actually doing the job, you know, that's where the challenge lies. But hopefully that's being addressed, and Mandy had some great thoughts and ideas, and you know, at the Armchair Air Show we have coming up in May, we've got a big focus on women in aviation. So it's little things like that, isn't it, that I think get the message out.
I'm hugely passionate about increasing minority pilot groups into aviation, and again, huge topics about why people don't end up in aviation careers. So female pilots is 5 to 10% of female pilots. I can say that in 15 years, the airlines now have flown with 3 black pilots, which is just an unacceptable level of representation. And Mandy, amazing lady, amazing pilot. And she says you can't see it if you can't be it if you can't see it, which is so true. And in fact, I interviewed 4 outstanding female aviators who are going through flying training in the States on the podcast recently. And we had a huge discussion around this topic. And again, it goes back to being that adult and inspiring people from a young age and empowering them to think that they can do things. And and I can't think of a better organisation than Airability that does that amazing work to help inspire and empower people to dream bigger and to do things that they maybe didn't think were possible.
Yeah, no, here, absolutely. And I think representing those minorities is it's our duty, isn't it? You know, we have this opportunity to put back in. So no, I couldn't agree more. Well, talking about, you know, putting back and cashing in, we were talking earlier, weren't we, before we went onto the podcast about, you know, the ability for someone who has a career in aviation to somehow put it in a bottle and do something with it and make it pay, both in terms of a business, but also in terms of bringing new blood into this wonderful market that we call aviation. And that brings me nicely on to Flight Deck Wingman, which is your company that you've set up. And as I say, I think there's nothing that the model from where I see things, Andrew, is it's nothing more simple than you having the ability to just call upon your experience, your career experience, and help people out. So tell us about Flight Deck Wingman.
Yeah, thanks, John. I started it around 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago, when I moved from Thomas Cook to my current airline, and I started right at the bottom again, and I was a bit bored, if I'm honest with you. And then all of my mates that were leaving the military about the time I should have left were asking if they could have a bit of help, and I helped one or two, and they said, you know, you should turn this into a business. You're really quite good at it. And I guess I did, as you say, cash in on experience and a genuine passion for wanting to help people and understand when somebody was lacking in confidence, how to build their confidence, understand when somebody didn't understand something, how to help them understand it so that they could put their best foot forward and be successful with their job applications. And it started with helping military pilots apply to the airlines. And now we help people apply to flight schools. We help people just out of flight school apply to airlines. We even help people with applying to the military. And yeah, just cashing in on all of that experience. It is a business. But I love it. I really, really love helping people. And when you make a fundamental difference to people's lives, you know, someone that's really got their hopes set on this career, or perhaps it means a lot to their family if they're leaving the forces to get this opportunity to join this particular airline, and they get it, then that's a great feeling. There's so many pilots at the moment, obviously, in pretty awful situations, and crew and engineers and anyone associated with the airline. So my heart goes out to all of those. But I genuinely have a passion for helping people, and that's what Flight Deck Wingman does. And
it's great to turn the passion into business, and because that's what keeps you motivated, isn't it? And makes you, you know, do the best you could, be the best you can be. And give us a flavour of some of the folks that you've supported.
Wow. So everyone, so I say, people applying to a particular flight school that want to get in, and you know, it means a lot to them to get into that particular flight school. I've helped some pretty senior military pilots, group captains leaving and applying to the airlines, and then I've helped people through redundancy as well, applying to other airlines. So when Thomas Cook tragically went into administration, we offered 100% free support to those pilots, as we did to Flybe before COVID took control of the situation, sadly. But helping them with just at that stage, these people all had jobs, and they probably had the ability to go and perform well at another selection process. But some of them needed a bit of extra help, and some of them just needed a bit of a confidence boost and an opportunity to get together with other pilots and chat about what had happened. And that's what we did. So then that was hugely rewarding, helping those pilots that had lost their jobs. And again, just to reiterate, I'm genuinely thinking of everybody that's out of work at the moment. And if anyone is, they can also get in touch on the website and book a free call with me to chat about the circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. Here. And of course, we'll do the same thing. We'll get you heard through the Airability channels as well, because I think what you're doing is great. It's, you know, it's any opportunity, any method for people to be prepared and chart their path in back into the back into this part of the industry, or to transition from the military, or just to try it, you know, for the first time. I mean, it's the young blood we need as well as those that need to return. So no, I think it's a great thing that you're doing, which then, you know, relates to your podcast, which you've mentioned, for Flying Out Loud. I mean, I've heard them. I think they're brilliant. You're on some really topical subjects, and subjects that need to be aired and shared. Tell us about that, and how long has that been going for?
Yeah, so pretty much like everybody in lockdown and started a podcast. And I guess I had a load of stories that I wanted to get out there from other people that I just knew. I just thought, hey, and again, really on this theme of inspiring, empowering people was just to get a message out there so that people that maybe thought, and they're not necessarily wanted to become pilots, just I think hearing inspirational stories from people helps people. And it's been great. I roughly knock out one episode a month because it takes a lot of research. And in fact, I'm really looking forward to interviewing Airability charity to hear more about the amazing work that you do, and already had some discussions with some puts anything that anyone I know has done that's inspirational completely into context when you hear about some of the stories and the amazing things that your charity does, John. But I've had opportunity to interview some amazing people. As I say, my lead test partner of 35 program, first land on HMS Queen Elizabeth. I interviewed Red One squadron leader, I think now Wing Commander Martin Pert, who was, as a kid watching Red Arrows at an air show, and then to be very, very kind of Percy to get on the podcast with me, but to sit there interviewing as he was then current Red One was just blew my mind, to be honest with you. I was very grateful. And then again, some other really sort of inspirational characters, people that have learned and funded their flying training over a period of 8 years. A guy called Plain Old Ben, and he'd been an Italian waiter and then a car salesman, and then led this big project for BMW, and then ultimately achieved his dream and flew for Flybe, and then lost his job, but now flies for Draken. So, really cool. And then these 4 female pilots from Women in Aviation International to get a really positive message out there to try and improve representation amongst women and encourage more young women to get into aviation. So I've loved the podcast, and I'm really, really looking forward to interviewing Airability as well, John.
Oh, well, we can't wait, and that's going to be a really good one, I can tell. And it's because we're a family. We all love aviation. We all have the same passion, don't we, and the same drive. And I think it's so important to use these channels to get to those folks that need to fill our shoes, because we're all getting a bit older, and there was a shortage of pilots before COVID, and we need to reach out to those folks. Discovery Wings is no longer on the TV, so I can no longer enjoy that on a Sunday. So we need to have more of these podcasts and such like. So now you were telling me that you got into another form of aviation relatively recently. You've gone through your military career and you joined the airlines, and then you discovered gliding. So tell us the story.
I won't bore people too much because I'll talk forever on this sport. I absolutely love it. Yeah, about 8 years ago, a friend of mine said, "Do you want to come to this cold, boggy field up in the Lake Districts and go and get winched up on this glider?" And I thought, well, that sounds utterly ridiculous. I'm in. So off we went, and we launched on this winch launch where you get sort of wound up into the air on a fishing reel and headed off to this ridge and soared this ridge using the air currents that were flowing up from the wind of the hill. And I was just blown away that you could stay airborne, and that was ridge flying. And I just wanted to get back in and do some fun flying, some poling around, and that's what I did. And I joined my local club up in the Peak District. And this photo was just last year. 8 years later, I'm flying my own glider there, that thing with an electric motor. So people say it's not gliding to get me out of Dodge if I need to, but I flew my first ever 750-kilometer flight in that glider last year, airborne for about 8 hours. Flown my first ever national competition. I came about bottom quarter, but there were some world champions in that field, and I just absolutely love it, John. It's like the best blend of handling, airmanship, workload management, and actually a bit like air combat when you're flying with 30 or 40 other gliders in a thermal. It's pretty intense. I just love it. It's a fantastic sport.
Well, I have to admit, I started off gliding and then I've never gone back to it. And there's been a few opportunities for me to get back in. And I hearing you talk like that, having done what you've done, I think it's well worth having another shot, because there's a lot of gliding clubs around the country, and isn't it funny? There's a bit of a them and us between the powered GA side of flying in the UK and the gliding community. I don't know why. Maybe we're getting in each other's way, but
I tell you, one of the things I actually love about gliding is it's a real leveler, and everyone has to help out to help everyone else get airborne. It's one of those sorts of sports, a little bit different to the GA world, I would argue. But yeah, I mean, I'd encourage any GA pilots, and come down, John. Let's go flying out of Lasham this summer. Any GA pilots, go and have a go at it, because it really is an amazing sport. And don't worry about not having an engine. It's if you have to land in the field, then go and land in the field. But actually, you'd be surprised how far and how long you can stay airborne.
And you know, that's the great thing, isn't it? It's a sport, and that's the appeal. You know, it's the challenge, isn't it, to get from A to B in the nav competitions, and you know, ridge flying, soaring, thermals, and all these. Do they call it sledging as well? Where you go
they say that photo is in Australia. A sledge ride is when you just go up and there's no lift, and you just fly back down to the ground. But as you can see on this day, I think I'm up at about 10,000 feet there. Heading out on a flight in Australia. I've been to South Africa, flying in some immense weather on the edge of thunderstorms, the lightning coming out and the rain from the thunderstorm blowing out and hitting the glider, and trying to get back to the airfield. It's an incredible, it is a sport. And when you start racing other gliders around the sky at pretty fast speeds, over 100 knots, and then pulling up into a thermal and losing 50 knots of airspeed to thermal with 30 other gliders, it's an incredibly exhilarating sport. For me, it's the best flying I've ever done, and that might sound a bit odd to people, but I mean, I love it. Yeah,
and I've had the opportunity to fly some classic airplanes, and actually, I think the less thinking you can do in the cockpit with operating the aircraft, and actually enjoy being up there and taking in the world around you, it seems more satisfying, doesn't it? And I'm sure gliding really gives that in bundles.
Yeah, it does. It's amazing.
Yeah. Right. Well, we've gone over the hour, and we could spend a lot more time, Andrew, talking about all of these incredible experiences you've lived through. But I'd like to turn it to a few questions now, if I may. So do keep sending your questions in. Remember, you can hit the comment bar on YouTube, or you can add your question into Facebook. So I've got a few that have come in, Andrew. One is harping back to the days on your conversion to the Harrier. And the question here is, do you think, or you may have, or did you ever suffer PTSD as a result of your training?
Not as a result of the training, as training is exceptional in the forces. I mean, I was never formally diagnosed or anything like that, but looking back on it now, I suspect that during that year with those 3 pretty catastrophic events, certainly the first one was awful, then yeah, but potentially, I mean, you know, it's not nothing that I feel now, but yeah, potentially I did. I think that'd be fair to say it.
Yeah. Next question here is your most memorable moment flying the Sea Harrier.
There's probably 2 if I'm allowed to. The first is the first solo that I spoke about. Just an incredible experience to think you've done it. That's it. That's the ultimate. You know, you've got into that jet, and then the first landing on the aircraft carrier. It's just all of your mates there on what they call Geefer's deck, gesticulating in rather rude ways at you as you're hovering over the deck about to land. But then that first deck landing on the ship, again, you know, that's right up there when you're a little kid. I couldn't get the grin off my face.
Yeah, I'm sure. The next one here is, what aircraft would you have loved to have flown but never got the chance?
I would love to fly an F-22 Raptor. I just think it's probably right up there. I mean, it's getting on a bit, I suppose, now, but it's in terms of seeing it at air displays, it just looks like an absolutely incredible piece of kit, and I genuinely give my right arm to go and fly that aircraft. Yeah,
here, I'll be right behind you. But without the training, of course, so you probably beat me to it. Question here is, can you comment on your personal feelings on the demise of the Sea Harrier? That's a good one.
Yeah, you know, it was a great platform. I think the demise of the Harrier force really was a great shame, and yeah, big topic. I don't want to get myself in trouble, but I think that we should have still had that capability before we got this present capability with the F-35 and the new carriers. But yeah, it was a shame. In fact, not long after I left, it was the end of the Sea Harrier force. But yeah, hope that's okay.
Yeah, this is a good one. What are the biggest differences between flying Boeing aircraft and Airbus aircraft?
So Boeing is much more like a normal aeroplane to fly. So it feels to me more coordinated, whereas the Airbus with the side stick, it's driven by ones and zeros, and you move the stick and it's a sort of a movement, and then you release. So you don't hold an input in as such. Otherwise, that's generating a load factor or a command to the. Whereas in a Boeing aircraft, it just feels more like a normal aircraft. So I prefer flying Boeing. But I mean, the tech on the Airbus, I guess, sort of first generation fly-by-wire tech in airlines, and now seeing what the 787 is like, which is sort of the best blend of the sort of fly-by-wire tech and normal aircraft handling characteristics. For me, the 787 is like the perfect big jet to handle. I think it's an incredible job by the engineers.
Yeah, and I've had I do quite a bit of flying for the day job and in the back. And the 787 experience is incredible. I mean, you do get out of that airplane after a long journey feeling more refreshed is the wrong word, but you're not as fatigued if you had been on an older generation aircraft, for example.
Yeah, well, there's loads of reasons behind that, but lower cabin pressurization because the fuselage is pressurized to a higher amount, and it brings in fresh air instead of air from the engines into the cabin. So there's loads of great things that make you feel better, and you're absolutely right, John.
Yeah. Right. And this one is from Andy. She's one of our brilliant volunteers at Airability. Were you trained in a simulator for the Sea Harrier, or was all training completed in the aircraft?
A split of both, Andrea. So the Sea Harrier did have a simulator, and we did a fair bit of work in there, but that was more of sort of less of the handling side of things, as you couldn't replicate it as well, and more of the working the radar system, etc. So when we're getting used to using the air-to-air radar and launching missiles and all of that type of stuff, then the simulator is really, really useful for that type of training.
Yeah, right. Okay, now here's a question. If you could give a younger person some advice, what would it be? And if I can just have dealer's choice here and say, let's, in the context of what we've been talking about resilience, dealing with challenges that pop up and just maneuvering around them and carrying on, how, what's that advice?
I think it was something which in 8th grade, the F-35 test pilot told me, and it's something I just agree with him entirely on. It's just try your very, very hardest not to fail at something, and not to carry on. If you do fail, just learn from it and move forward. So if things are a challenge, just try and work through that challenge. If it ends up being something that's more of a challenge, then just learn from it and move forward.
Yeah, great advice. Well, I think that just about concludes the questions as well, Andrew. Well, look, from me and from all the viewers, a huge thank you for, I think, your openness and your honesty, laying your soul bare. And I think that's really helped a lot of people to see things and understand challenges that they're having to go through from someone else's perspective. Maybe someone else who they felt maybe didn't have the same issues and challenges that they'd had. So for that, thank you so much. And also thank you for entertaining us with your tales of your flying. It's just been absolutely superb. So Andrew, thank you very much indeed.
No, thank you, John. It's genuinely been a privilege and humbling to speak to you and again to hear about all the amazing work the charity does and the people that have been able to utilise the charity to achieve things. I think it's a wonderful thing. And if anybody out there ever needs to talk, please just grab a number off the website and give me a call. If there's anything, not a trained psychiatrist, but if there's anyone feeling a bit down on the luck at the moment with job opportunities, etc., I'm always here to talk to people if they want someone to talk to.
Wonderful. So very well said, Andrew. Thank you. You're one of the team. You're one of the gang. Thank you all so much once again. And I look forward to your podcast about airability. That's going to be a cracker. So Andrew, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Well, there we go. That was really interesting. A real roller coaster emotional ride there this evening from Andrew, and I found that really interesting and entertaining. Right, well, this is not the end of our Inspirability talks. We've got plenty more coming up, and we'll be having another talk very soon. In a couple of weeks' time, you'll see more about that on social media in the coming days and weeks. We are edging ever closer to the clocks going forwards, and of course the time when we can also fly recreationally. So it's been a sunny day today, so not too long before we can get out and about and socialize and get up in the air and start making our own stories and tales that we can talk about in the future. So for now, it's going to be a time for me to say goodbye, sign off for the evening. Have a great evening, everybody, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon.